In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brakes, pads and rotors on this GMC Acadia. These will be located behind your front wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your front wheels are off the ground. Once you've completed that, remove all 6 of your 22mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, we have a clear view of our front brake rotor and our brake caliper. The brake pads are located inside of the caliper area. To be able to start removing the caliper, we have to push back our 2 caliper pistons. Those will make their way into this area here. To be able to push these back, you can carefully do it with a small pry bar or pretty much anything that's a small prying device. We just want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage. When pushing these back, you want to push back both of them at the same time if possible. I'm just going to make my way right inside this groove here. We'll pry up against the brake rotor and pull the caliper outward. Slow and steady wins the race here. We're not trying to rush along. Now that we have movement from there, we'll continue on to our 2 caliper slider mounting bolts. To remove each of these bolts, we'll be using a 17mm. We'll start with the upper mounting bolts. Go ahead and remove that. A quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads. Now we can get this last one out of there. We'll slide the caliper out of position. Once you've removed the caliper from the brake pads and brake caliper bracket, it's time to inspect the caliper itself. We need to pay attention along each one of our 2 pistons. If you see any fluid coming out of the seal, that means the internal seal on the caliper is no good, and you have to go ahead and replace the caliper. This one looks good, so we'll set it aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. Now let's remove the brake pads. On the brake pads, you should find that you have 2 small clips, one up along the top and one along the bottom. Those are essentially on the brake pads to try to push them away from the brake rotor every time you release the brake pedal. We'll go ahead and remove those, give them a quick inspection, and set them aside for recycling. Just slide them right on out of those brake pads. There's one. Remove the brake pads from your brake caliper bracket. A quick inspection of those. It's a good idea to pay attention to see if it looks like they're worn at an angle. If they are, typically that means you have an issue with one of your caliper slider pins or even one of the pistons on the caliper itself. Both those look pretty much okay. We'll set them aside for recycling and we can continue on to our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. To remove those 2 bolts, we'll be using a 21mm. You know what to do. We'll start at the top, remove it, quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads, fully remove the lower bolt. Remove your caliper bracket. A quick inspection will set it aside. We will have to clean and lubricate this. Continuing on from here, we'll remove the brake rotor. To remove the brake rotor, it's a good idea to reinstall one of your lug nuts, just a couple threads here, to prevent the rotor from falling off. Continuing from there, you're going to find that you have one T27 Torx screw to remove. We'll give this a close inspection, clean it up, set it aside. You will be reusing this. Remove your lug nut. And your front brake rotor. There it is, friend. Once the brake rotor's out of the way, we need to pay attention to our wheel bearing hub. This is the mating surface where your brand new rotor will sit, so we need to make sure it's a clean mating surface. Once we do have it cleaned with some parts cleaner and a wire brush, we'll apply some anti-seize on this area and we can install the brand new rotor. I've got my parts cleaner here. That looks a lot better. Time for some anti-seize. Let's prepare the brand new rotor for installation. To do that, we have to clean both braking surfaces. You have the outboard side and the inboard side. We'll use some parts cleaner and a rag. With the brake rotor cleaned up, we'll slide this into place. Continue on with your 1 Torx screw to hold this in place. You should have 2 holes on the hub itself. Just go ahead and find one that aligns. Start in the screw, snug it up. It's time to gain focus on the brake caliper bracket itself now. We're going to remove everything from the bracket, clean it, and lubricate, reinstall some new tins, and we'll prepare to install this on the vehicle. To start disassembling this, we'll start with our slider pins. Take hold of the slider pin and the boot. We're trying to separate the slider pin from that boot. Typically, you can just slide it right on out of there. Once you have it out of there, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and clean down the entire shafted area. On one of your slider pins, typically you're going to find a rubber vibration dampener at the very end. You can see that right here where my fingertips are. You want to make sure it's not swollen or damaged in any way. If it feels like it can slide around or even slide off of there, you want to go ahead and replace that. That can cause a braking issue. This one looks fine. We checked the entire shafted area and all the way up into the groove here where the boot sits. We'll set this aside and remember which side of the caliper bracket it goes on. During the installation process, it's extremely important to make sure it goes in the same port. Continue on to removing your caliper slider mounting boot. To do that, you want to take hold of the boot itself, gently roll it out of place. Once you've removed it, we'll go ahead and clean this. Take a rag, give it a quick twist, and slide it right on through the center. See it starting to come out of there? There we are. It's a tight fit. Now we'll just roll this around. You can see all that grease making its way off of there. We want to make sure we remove as much of the original grease and any miscellaneous debris as possible. After that, just give it a quick squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged. We'll set this slider boot aside with the slider pin that we had removed from this side. Repeat the process on the opposite side of the caliper bracket. There we are, quick inspection of that last slider boot. We already inspected the pin. The next thing we'll do is continue on to removing our 2 caliper tins here. You can use a small prying device, just have a small pry bar. Quick inspection of that, we'll set it aside for recycling. We have brand new ones that you always want to use. Now it's time to clean the caliper bracket itself. When cleaning this, the first thing I like to do is clean up the areas where those 2 caliper bracket tins were. For this, you can use a wire brush. After those areas are cleaned, we're going to go inside of each of the ports for our caliper slider pins. With both sides of the caliper bracket cleaned, let's clean the ports for the slider tins. When you're spraying parts cleaner into this area, it's probable that fluid and air will make its way out. Let's be extremely careful for that. Use a bore brush to clean out the inside. A quick rinse, repeat the process on the other side. Once your caliper bracket is completely cleaned and inspected, it's time to lubricate and reinstall. To lubricate this, I'm using high temperature caliper lubricant. I'm going to go along the areas where my two caliper tins would have went. We have areas along each side of the caliper bracket. Once those are lubricated, we'll install those tins. For these, you just want to carefully line them up, press them on, and listen for a click. We're double checking to make sure it's properly secured. If it slides right off of there, the locking clips aren't locked in properly. You want to give it a quick squeeze. Repeat the process on the other side here. Now let's pay attention to our caliper slider pin ports. We'll add some high temperature lubricant directly inside of the port, especially all the way on the outboard side here. Once you have that lubricated, reinstall your caliper pin boot. For this, we're just going to line it up, carefully roll it in. Once you feel as though you do have it in the proper position, just give it a quick spin and a light tug. It should not slide out of there. Continuing from here, it's time for the caliper slider pin. When lubricating and installing these, it's important to make sure, once again, they go in the exact same port as where you had removed them. If you mix them up, you're going to have a braking issue. We'll lubricate the entire shaft all the way down closest to my fingers here where that small groove is for the boot. Slide this right on in there. Once you have it pressed in, we're going to give that a twist as well. Squeeze out any air that's left in the boot here and continue on repeating the process on the other side of the caliper bracket. We've got the one with the vibration dampener going in the original port. Press it in, squeeze the air. Quick twist. Let's get this over to the vehicle. We'll slide this bracket right into place. Continuing from here, we have our two caliper bracket mounting bolts. You can see that I applied some blue thread locker to the threaded area. We'll start these in, snug them up, and torque them to 111 foot-pounds. After you've torqued each of those bolts to 111, continue tightening them an additional 15 to 30 degrees. Now it's time for our brake pads. Looking in your kit, you're going to find that you have two brake pads with wear indicators. We want that wear indicator pad to be the inboard pad, and you want to ensure that you have the wear indicator facing up. We'll slide this into place. Once you feel as though you have it in there, you need to try to give it a wiggle. If you had to use a hammer or even bonk it in with your hand and it feels like it's extremely tight, you did not clean the bracket well enough. Same process for the outboard pad. We'll slide this into position. Once again, making sure everything can maneuver around as necessary. Let's pause in this area and make our way to the caliper itself. We're going to give the caliper pistons a quick wipe, a close inspection. Now we'll focus on these three ears on the opposite side of the caliper. Once again, a quick wipe and a close inspection. After that, we'll be using some high temperature caliper lubricant in each of these 5 areas. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now it's almost time to reinstall the caliper, but before we do, we have to make sure we install the brake pad hardware here. As you align this and you attempt to put it into the opposite pad, you're going to find it wants to separate the pads, so you need to make sure you're holding on to it, preventing it from wanting to separate away from the brake rotor. You can see that it's trying to do that right here. Let's get this one on there as well. Now we can take that brake caliper, we'll slide it right over this area. Be careful for any pinch points as we continue. Continuing from here, we have our two brake caliper slider mounting bolts. Once again, a tiny bit of blue thread locker. Start them on, snug them up, torque those to 53 foot-pounds. One last quick inspection in this area to confirm everything's properly installed and torqued as necessary, and we can reinstall our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 22mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out. Get the wheel safely back down on the ground and torque each of these to 140 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your front brakes. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've completed that, go ahead and make your way into the passenger compartment. Pump up your brake pedal till it's nice and firm, and then take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.